I walked into my living room carrying a tray of afternoon tea, expecting to find my children browsing through old photo albums, or maybe discussing weekend plans. Instead, I found Trent and Rebecca screaming at each other across my coffee table. My half-written will spread between them like ammunition in a war zone. "She's leaving you the lake house because you're her favorite," Trent shouted, his face red with anger as he waved the legal documents in the air. "It's not fair. I'm the one who helped Dad build that dock," Rebecca fired back with equal venom. "At least I visit her more than once a month. At least I actually care about her well-being instead of just showing up when you need money." They were so absorbed in their battle that they didn't notice me standing frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding as I watched my own children divide my life like scavengers picking over a fresh kill. The tea tray trembled in my hands as the reality sank in. They were planning my funeral while I was still breathing. Rebecca finally turned and saw me standing there. Her eyes went cold as steel. "Well, at least now you know we don't trust you either, Mom." I set the tea tray down with shaking hands and sank onto the couch, feeling like someone had just punched me in the stomach. My children scrambled to collect the will pages, their faces flushed with embarrassment and defiance. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had opened up in my living room floor. Trent mumbled an apology that sounded more like an excuse. We wanted to know where we stood, Mom. We were curious about your plans." "Curious?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm still alive and you're already burying me." Rebecca tried to justify their behavior, claiming they were worried about my health and wanted to make sure everything was organized properly. But I could see the greed glittering in their eyes, the way they calculated the value of everything I had worked for with my late husband. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. I looked at these two people I had raised, fed, loved, and sacrificed for, and saw strangers who viewed me as an obstacle standing between them and my money. That night, I heard them whispering in the hallway outside my bedroom. "We need to make sure she doesn't change it again," one of them hissed. In my bedroom that night, I sat staring at the framed photo of my late husband Thomas on the nightstand. His kind eyes seemed to understand my heartbreak as I whispered, "They're fighting over ghosts, Tom. They're treating me like I'm already gone." Sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake thinking about how my children had transformed from the loving kids who used to fight over who got to sit in my lap into adults who fought over who would get my house. Somewhere along the way, I had failed them as a mother, or perhaps they had simply revealed their true nature. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Adler, before the children woke up. His voice was professional but warm when he answered. "Good morning, Diana. What can I do for you today?" "I want to revise my will," I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "What's changed?" he asked, and I could hear him reaching for his notepad. "Everything," I replied, looking out the window at the lake house where Thomas and I had spent our happiest years. "Absolutely everything has changed." What I didn't tell Mr. Adler was that I wasn't just planning to write a new will. I was crafting something much more powerful, a test that would reveal my children's true character. The first test came sooner than I expected. I staged a minor health scare, deliberately collapsing in the kitchen while making breakfast. The thud of my body hitting the floor brought both children running, but their reactions couldn't have been more different. Rebecca immediately called 911, her hands shaking as she knelt beside me, checking my pulse and trying to keep me comfortable. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe I had been wrong about her. Trent arrived 20 minutes later, complaining loudly about having to waste gas driving across town. "This better be serious," he muttered as he walked through the front door. At the hospital, while the doctors ran routine tests to confirm I was fine, Rebecca pulled out her phone and snapped a selfie of us together in the emergency room. She posted it on social media with the caption, "Taking care of Mom again #blessed #family." The post received dozens of likes within minutes. She wanted digital validation, not genuine connection. The photo was about her image, not my well-being. As I pretended to rest in the hospital bed, I overheard Trent in the hallway asking a nurse, "So, if she doesn't make it, what exactly happens to the house and everything?" Back home from the hospital, I followed Mr. Adler's suggestion and installed a small security camera in my study, hidden behind some books where my children would never think to look. If they were going to treat me like a mark in some elaborate con game, I would gather evidence of their true intentions. I started spending more time in bed, pretending to be friendlier than I actually felt. They bought the performance completely, treating me like a delicate flower who might break at any moment. The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted me weak so they could control the narrative about my estate. At dinner that evening, I casually mentioned that I was considering selling the lake house to downsize my responsibilities. It's becoming too much work to maintain, I said, watching their faces carefully. Rebecca's fork stopped midway to her mouth, suspended in the air like she had been frozen in time. Trent's forced smile froze on his face, and I could practically see the dollar signs disappearing from his eyes. You can't sell the lake house, Rebecca said quickly. It has too much sentimental value. Dad loved that place. That night, the hidden camera captured everything I needed to see. One of them was definitely planning something, and now I would have proof of exactly what they were willing to do. I reviewed the security footage the next morning while my children were at work. The black and white video showed Trent sneaking into my study at 2 a.m., carefully opening my desk drawer and photographing the new pages of my will with his phone. He moved like a professional thief, quick and silent, clearly having planned this invasion of my privacy. Instead of confronting him immediately, I printed screenshots of his midnight activities and slid them into a folder labeled proof. Mr. Adler had been right. Playing the long game would be more effective than explosive confrontations. Let them think they're winning, he had advised during our private meeting. Give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves. Trent's theft of my private documents was just the beginning. If he was willing to violate my privacy and trust this easily, what else would he do to secure his inheritance? I was beginning to understand that my children saw me as an obstacle rather than their mother. The evidence was mounting, but I needed more. I needed to see just how far their greed would take them, how much of their humanity they were willing to sacrifice for money. My late husband's voice echoed in my memory. People show you who they really are when they think no one is watching. Sunday dinner became my testing ground. I invited both children over and made their favorite meal, just like I had done every week for the past 5 years since Thomas died. They both arrived bearing gifts. Expensive wine that they probably couldn't afford, flowers that would die within a week, and compliments that felt rehearsed. The performance of their love was almost Oscar-worthy. They asked about my health, complimented my cooking, and shared carefully edited stories about their work lives. But I could see the calculation behind their eyes, the way they were measuring every word for its potential impact on their inheritance. During dessert, I casually mentioned that I was considering adding a charitable donation clause to my will. I've been thinking about leaving a significant portion to the animal shelter where your father and I used to volunteer. Rebecca's mask slipped completely. You can't give away what's ours, she blurted out, then immediately realized her mistake. I set down my fork and looked at her calmly. Ours? I asked, letting the word hang in the air like an accusation. Her face went white as she understood that her greed had just revealed itself. The money wasn't ours. It was mine, earned through decades of work and careful saving with Thomas. The next morning, I put my acting skills to the test. I called Trent, pretending to dial the wrong number, and let him overhear a staged conversation with my lawyer. Mr. Adler, I need you to make sure my will reflects their true character, I said loudly into the phone, making sure every word was clear. I'm seeing sides of my children I never knew existed. We need to adjust the inheritance accordingly. I hung up and waited. The response came faster than I expected. Within an hour, I received a text message from Trent. Mom, we need to talk about Rebecca. I'm worried about her spending habits and how they might affect the family. Perfect. He was already trying to throw his sister under the bus to protect his own interests. The siblings who had been fighting together against me were now turning on each other. Exactly as I had hoped. Greed was a powerful force that destroyed even the strongest family bonds. My children were proving that they valued money more than each other, more than me, and certainly more than the integrity Thomas and I had tried to instill in them. The divide and conquer strategy was working flawlessly. Trent showed up at my house the next afternoon, wearing his most concerned expression. He sat across from me in the living room, his hands folded like he was about to deliver a medical diagnosis. "Mom, I'm really worried about Rebecca," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Have you noticed how much she's been spending lately? The expensive clothes, the fancy dinners? I think she might have a problem." I nodded thoughtfully, playing along with his manipulation. "You know, I have been concerned about her financial responsibility." His eyes lit up with hope. "Maybe you should trust me more with the estate planning. I've always been better with money than she has." I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope labeled, "Revised Will." His hands shook slightly as I placed it in his palm. "Don't open this until the time is right," I said mysteriously. "But this might address your concerns about Rebecca." As he left, clutching the fake envelope like it contained the secrets to eternal wealth, I noticed Rebecca's car pulling up outside. She had been watching the house, probably wondering why her brother was visiting without her. The trap was set, and they were both walking right into it. The explosion came exactly as I had predicted. Both children stormed into my living room, accusations flying like shrapnel in a war zone. Rebecca was furious that Trent had been meeting with me privately, while Trent was defensive about his right to be concerned about the family's financial future. "She's trying to manipulate you against me," Rebecca shouted, pointing an accusing finger at her brother. "I'm trying to protect our mother's interests," Trent fired back. "Unlike some people who only show up when they want something." I sat calmly in my armchair, sipping my tea while they tore each other apart. The children I had raised to love and support each other were now enemies, united only in their greed and their resentment toward me for not dying fast enough to satisfy their financial needs. Finally, when their screaming reached a crescendo, I set down my teacup and spoke quietly. "It's fascinating what people reveal when they think money is listening." They both turned to stare at me, suddenly aware that I had been observing their behavior with the detachment of a scientist studying lab rats. I glanced meaningfully at the bookshelf where my hidden camera was recording everything, its tiny red light blinking like a heartbeat. That evening, I sat in my study reviewing the footage my camera had captured over the past few weeks. The evidence was damning and heartbreaking in equal measure. Both children had been caught on video discussing how to pressure me into signing documents early, before she gets too old and forgets what she's doing. "We need to make her understand that this is best for everyone," Rebecca had said during one late-night strategy session with her brother. "If we wait too long, she might change her mind or get influenced by someone else," Trent had replied. "We need to act fast." They were talking about me like I was already senile, incapable of making my own decisions about my own life and property. The disrespect was staggering, but the evidence was exactly what I needed. Mr. Adler smiled when I showed him the recordings during our next meeting. "This is all admissible in court if necessary," he confirmed. "Your children have essentially confessed to attempting elder manipulation." "Good," I replied. "Now let's start drafting my real will, the one that will teach them what really matters in life." The foundation of my master plan was complete. Now came the fun part, watching them destroy themselves. I called Rebecca to my house for a private mother-daughter conversation. She arrived wearing her most innocent expression, probably hoping to undo whatever damage Trent had done during his solo visit. "Rebecca, sweetheart," I began, taking her hands in mine. "I've been thinking a lot about fairness and family loyalty. After everything that's happened, I've decided you should be the sole beneficiary of my estate." Her eyes widened with shock and delight. "Really? But what about Trent? Trent has shown me sides of himself that concern me," I said sadly. "You've always been more caring, more present in my life. It's only fair that the inheritance reflects that." She hugged me with what appeared to be genuine emotion, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll take care of everything Dad built." But her promise proved worthless within hours. By evening, my phone was ringing with Trent's furious voice. "I heard what you did. How could you cut me out completely?" Rebecca had broken her promise of secrecy immediately, probably to gloat over her victory. The loyalty and discretion she claimed to possess had evaporated the moment she had something to brag about. Deciding to test their character more directly, I gave each of my children a trial inheritance, to see how they would handle responsibility. Trent received a small rental property to manage, while Rebecca got access to a savings account designated for my care expenses. This will help me understand how well you can handle larger responsibilities, I explained to each of them separately. Think of it as practice for the future. They both accepted the gifts with enthusiasm and promises to prove themselves worthy of my trust. The property was worth about $50,000, and the savings account contained $10,000. Not enormous amounts, but enough to test their judgment and integrity. Within 1 week, both experiments had turned into disasters. The tenants in Trent's rental property called me directly to complain about neglected maintenance requests and his refusal to return their security deposits. He was treating the property like a personal ATM rather than a business responsibility. Rebecca's handling of the savings account was even worse. She had overdrafted it within 5 days, spending money on luxury items rather than saving it for my actual care needs. Their failures were complete and documented, providing me with even more evidence of their unsuitability as heirs to anything of value. The public embarrassment of their failures came swiftly, and was more devastating than I had anticipated. Rebecca's mismanagement of the care fund resulted in a bounce check at her workplace charity gala, where she had tried to make a large donation to impress her colleagues. The humiliation was complete when the charity coordinator called her out publicly for the failed payment. "I'm sorry, but Rebecca's check has been returned for insufficient funds," the woman announced to the entire room of Rebecca's professional contacts. Meanwhile, Trent's rental property fell into legal trouble when he failed to pay the property taxes on time. The city issued public notices of delinquency, and the tenants threatened to sue for habitability violations. Neither of my children could handle these relatively small responsibilities, yet they expected to inherit my entire life's work without any accountability or oversight. When they both showed up at my door in tears that evening, begging for help to fix their mistakes, I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. They were proving everything I had suspected about their character and their readiness for adult responsibilities. "Please, Mom," Rebecca sobbed. "I can explain everything. I just made some small mistakes." Small mistakes. I repeated. These weren't mistakes. These were choices. I looked at my 2 children standing in my doorway, tears streaming down their faces, hands outstretched for help with problems they had created through their own greed and incompetence. The moment felt like a turning point, not just in our family dynamic, but in my understanding of who they had become. "If you had worked half as hard for your own lives as you did planning for my death," I said calmly, "you wouldn't need my money to solve the problems you've created." Trent's face turned red with indignation. "That's not fair. We care about you. You care about my assets," I corrected. "There's a difference, and it's a difference I'm no longer willing to ignore." Rebecca tried a different approach, appealing to sentiment and family history. "Dad would have wanted us to stick together as a family. Your father would have been ashamed of what you've become," I replied, and watched as my words hit them like physical blows. They left that night angry and humiliated, finally understanding that their manipulation tactics were no longer working. The dynamic had shifted, and I was no longer the vulnerable old woman they could guilt into submission. That night, I wrote a letter labeled "Final Lesson" and locked it in my safe, knowing they would never see it coming. The next phase of my plan required a grand gesture that would force my children to reveal their true priorities publicly. I announced that I was selling everything I owned to create a charitable foundation for widows and single mothers, the Turner Foundation, named after my late husband. "I've realized that accumulating wealth for its own sake is meaningless," I told them during what I announced would be our final family dinner. "I want to help people who are struggling the way your father and I once struggled." Rebecca's response was immediate and vicious. "This is just manipulative guilt tripping. You're trying to punish us for caring about our inheritance." Trent was even more direct in his threats. "I'll sue you for elder coercion if you give away what should belong to your family." Their masks had finally fallen completely. The loving, concerned children they pretended to be had been replaced by greedy strangers who felt entitled to money they had never earned. They weren't sad about losing me. They were angry about losing my assets. Word spread quickly through our small community about my plans. I announced that I would be holding a farewell party, where I would formally announce my final estate plans to friends and neighbors. The farewell party was held in the community center where Thomas and I had attended countless social events over the years. Friends, neighbors, former colleagues, and Mr. Adler all attended, curious about what I had planned for this unusual gathering. I stood at the podium wearing my best dress, the one Thomas had always said made me look like a movie star. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the microphone, but my voice was strong and clear. My children thought they could predict my death and plan accordingly. I began, looking out at the crowd of familiar faces. They treated my life like an asset to be divided rather than a story still being written. So instead of waiting to die, I've decided to start truly living. The room was silent as I explained how I had discovered their greed and manipulation. Then came the moment I had been planning for months. I have something to show you, I said, gesturing to the large screen behind me. The video montage began playing, carefully edited footage of Trent and Rebecca fighting over my will, discussing how to manipulate me, and revealing their true feelings about my continued existence. Gasps filled the room as my community saw my children's greed displayed in high definition. The aftermath of the video screening was immediate and devastating for my children. Rebecca fled the community center in tears, unable to face the judgment in the eyes of people who had known her since childhood. Trent stayed longer, shouting at anyone who would listen that the footage was fake and taken out of context. But the damage was done. Our small community had seen the truth about my children's character, and the story spread quickly through social media and local gossip networks. Within days, the local newspaper picked up the story of a mother who had tested her greedy children and found them wanting. The headline read, "Local mother exposes children's inheritance scheme through hidden camera evidence." Mr. Adler called me with concerning news. "Diana, I've heard from sources that Trent and Rebecca are planning to contest your new will. They're going to claim you're mentally unstable and were coerced into changing your estate plans." I had expected this desperate move. When people are caught in lies and manipulation, they often try to flip the script and paint themselves as victims. My children were following the predictable playbook of exposed fraudsters. "Let them try," I said calmly. "I have documentation of my mental competency, and their own recorded words will destroy any credibility they might have had." The courtroom battle would be the final test of my plan. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, but it felt like the center of the universe as my children's lawyer presented their case for why my new will should be invalidated. They claimed I was suffering from dementia, depression, and undue influence from Mr. Adler. Trent took the stand first, painting himself as a concerned son who had only wanted to protect his aging mother from making irrational decisions. "She's not the same person she used to be," he testified with practiced emotion. "The mother I knew would never have done something so cruel to her own children." Rebecca followed with her own performance, complete with tears and dramatic pauses. "She's been acting paranoid and suspicious for months. We were just trying to help her organize her affairs before she forgot important details." Their lawyer was competent but working with impossible material. How do you defend clients who have been caught on video confessing to manipulation and greed? When Mr. Adler began presenting our evidence, the courtroom atmosphere shifted completely. The judge watched the video footage with increasing disgust, and the recordings of their private conversations about pressuring me into early signing played like confessions at a murder trial. The judge's final statement was devastating. "I find Mrs. Turner to be perfectly competent and thoroughly unimpressed by her children's behavior." The moment of truth arrived when the judge opened the sealed envelope containing my final will. The courtroom was silent as she read through the carefully crafted document that represented months of planning and soul-searching. "The last will and testament of Diana Turner," the judge read aloud, "leaves the entirety of her estate to the Turner Foundation for Single Parents, established in memory of her late husband Thomas Turner." The gasps from Trent and Rebecca were audible throughout the courtroom. They stared at me in shock, finally understanding that their inheritance had vanished completely. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of property they had fought over would now help struggling families instead of funding their greed. "Mrs. Turner has also included a personal message," the judge continued. "To my children, I gave you life, love, and every opportunity to become good people. Your greed has shown me that my greatest gift to you is teaching you that love cannot be bought, and character cannot be inherited. Learn to earn what you want through your own efforts. Trent jumped to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is insane. You can't give away everything. I already have, I replied calmly. The courtroom erupted in whispers and movement, as my children's world collapsed around them. The aftermath of the court decision was swift and merciless. Within weeks, Trent's mounting debts from his failed business ventures caught up with him. Without the inheritance he had been counting on to bail him out, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. Rebecca's workplace fired her for ethical concerns after the video of her greed went viral on social media. Her professional reputation was destroyed, and she struggled to find new employment in our small community where everyone knew her story. They both tried calling me repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry threats to desperate pleas for forgiveness. I listened to each message once, then deleted them without responding. The silence felt powerful and necessary. For too long, I had enabled their entitled behavior by rescuing them from the consequences of their choices. Now they would learn what it meant to face life without a safety net funded by someone else's hard work. I packed a small suitcase and drove to the lake house that was now officially owned by the Turner Foundation. The irony was perfect. The property they had fought over would now provide retreat space for single mothers who needed time to rebuild their lives. As I unlocked the door to my sanctuary, I felt truly free for the first time in years. Lucille, my neighbor at the lake, visited me on my third day of solitude. She was a kind woman whose own children called her weekly and visited monthly, treating her with the respect and love that I had once expected from Trent and Rebecca. They'll come around eventually, she said gently as we sat on the dock watching the sunset. Children sometimes need to lose everything to understand what really matters. I smiled at her optimism, but I knew better. Maybe they will, Lucille. But I'm not waiting anymore. I spent too many years hoping they would grow into the people I wanted them to be instead of accepting who they actually are. That's wise, she replied. You can't love someone into being a better person. As evening approached, a letter slid under my door. The handwriting was Rebecca's, shaky and desperate, nothing like the confident script I remembered from her childhood thank you notes. I picked up the envelope and held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of whatever apology or manipulation lay inside. For the first time in months, I had a choice about whether to engage with my children's drama. Rebecca's letter was exactly what I had expected. 3 pages of regret mixed with excuses, apologies intertwined with justifications, and promises to change that felt as hollow as her previous declarations of love. Please, Mom, can we start over? The letter concluded. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. Doesn't that count for something? Can't we find a way to rebuild our relationship? I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in Thomas's old journal, the one where he had written down his hopes and dreams for our children's futures. His optimistic words about their potential now felt like prophecies that would never be fulfilled. Forgiveness is different from access, I whispered to his photo on the mantelpiece. I can forgive them for being who they are, but I don't have to give them opportunities to hurt me again. I dropped the letter into a drawer with the others they had sent, all unanswered. Some relationships couldn't be repaired with apologies and promises. Some damage was too complete, some trust too thoroughly broken. The silence wasn't cruel, it was self-preservation. After decades of giving them everything, I was finally giving myself the gift of peace. 6 months later, the Turner Foundation was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. The lake house had been converted into a retreat center, where single mothers could bring their children for weekend respites from their struggles. The main house had been turned into office space for financial counseling and job training programs. I hosted small workshops teaching financial independence and self-worth to women who reminded me of myself at their age, strong, capable people who had been told they weren't enough. Watching them discover their own power was more rewarding than any inheritance could have been. The thank you notes poured in weekly. Because of your foundation, I was able to leave an abusive relationship. Your job training program helped me get my first real career. My children and I finally have hope for the future. These letters from strangers meant more to me than anything my own children had ever written. One morning, I saw a newspaper headline that made me smile. Greedy heirs lose everything after mother outsmarts them. The story had become a cautionary tale about entitlement and the consequences of treating family members like assets. 1 year after the court decision, I sat by the lake in my favorite chair, sipping tea as the morning sun painted the water gold. The peace I felt was complete and earned, the result of choosing truth over comfort, justice over enabling, and self-respect over false family harmony. The Turner Foundation had grown beyond anything Thomas and I had imagined possible. We were helping hundreds of families annually, providing them with resources and hope that my children had never needed because they had been given everything without earning it. In the distance, I could hear the laughter of children playing on the beach. Kids whose mothers were attending workshops or simply taking a much-needed break from their struggles. This was what generational wealth should create. Opportunities for people to build better lives. I thought about my children occasionally, wondering if they had learned anything from losing their inheritance. But mostly, I focused on the future I was creating for people who would use help to build something meaningful rather than simply consume what others had earned. They fought over my will while I was still alive. I said aloud to the morning breeze. So I left them nothing but the truth about who they really are. A gentle smile crossed my face as I closed my eyes and felt the warm sunlight on my skin. This was what peace felt like, complete, justified, and finally mine.